Spider-Man is the name of the game this week, with symbiotes taking center stage. What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is Preview Picks, where we're talking about the books coming out on Wednesday, and to start off with, let's talk about independent titles. Over at Image, we get Low number 21, written by Rick Remender, and overall this is a continuation of another one of his series that he's currently writing, like Black Science, Deadly Class, Seven to Eternity, and then this one, of course. So, the continuation has been waiting a little while, but I'm glad that we're going to get back onto this comic book because Rick Remender is one of my favorite writers in independence. Also, we're going to get Oblivion Song number 14, which is a continuation of a Robert Kirkman story, and if Robert Kirkman knows anything, it's how to convert stories like this into some sort of cinema. So while this one's a little bit more offbeat because it's a sci-fi, alternate dimension, kind of pocket reality style story, I don't necessarily know if it's going to have the same kind of mileage as, I don't know, The Walking Dead, but overall, it's one that I've really been enjoying. Then there's a comic book from Boom Studios that I need to pick up, and that is Ronan Island number 2. So while I did miss out on Ronan Island number 1, Greg Pak is continuing to write this story, and overall I've heard some really good things about it, so that's intrigued me to the point where I'm going to have to pick it up just to see what it's all about. Making our way over to DC, we get the final issue of Titans with Titans number 36, so this is going to be the conclusion of this team until they come back in some other iteration, hopefully in the future. I don't necessarily know who's going to be writing it, but it seems like Abnett's going to be focusing on Justice League Odyssey, which we'll get to later in the video, but it's kind of sad to see the Titans go because that was the home for a lot of really great storytelling regarding DC Rebirth when it actually mattered. So, fond farewell to Titans number 36. Then, over at Marvel, we get Asgardians of the Galaxy number 8, which continues the story by Cullen Bunn, and overall it seems like this series was created just to give Angela something to do until the War of the Realms started, and I'm hoping that they can prove me wrong. They've been hunting down and trying to keep safe artifacts, and then all of a sudden, well, it doesn't necessarily matter anymore. So, the Asgardians of the Galaxy is heavily going to tie in to War of the Realms, and if that's your cup of tea, then you can find a little bit more Angela there. However, it's one that I haven't really been keeping up with, so I'm a little bit mixed. Another book that I've unfortunately not been keeping up with is Justice League Odyssey number 8, and this is going to continue the story of young Darkseid as he evolves into old Darkseid, and he's currently the only new god still left in the DC cosmic universe that we know about. So, it's a story that if you want to keep up on this kind of cosmic craziness that Scott Snyder initiated, it's a great place to find it, but it's not something that I've been reading myself. Continuing the trend of things that I'm unfortunately not reading, Marvelous X-Men number 3 is coming out, and that is part of the Age of X-Man storyline, which is dealing with this kind of alternate reality mutant utopia that was created by Nathan Gray, aka X-Man. So it's continuing the story of the main X-Men team that is dealing with Nate Gray on a regular basis, and how they're kind of evolving and rebelling. It's supposed to be a relatively interesting story, however, I'm not interested at all in the X-Man series, the X-Man group of titles that are really going on, so that means that this book, as well as Apocalypse and the Age of the Extracts, which gets issue number 2 this week, just aren't really on my radar. It's possible that I'm going to go back and read them in some sort of collected trade, but overall the idea of picking up all of these individual titles over the course of the month don't necessarily appeal to me because they're a really wide swath of this singular storyline, and I'd rather have something much more focused that I could pick up on a weekly basis like Avengers No Road Home, which continues to tell a relatively breakneck story instead of trying to piece all these individual writers' creative ideas together. Back over at DC, we continue to get some super stories in Supergirl number 29, which continues Mark Andreyko's tale of Supergirl out in space. And on the cover, it looks like she's wielding Rogol Zaar's axe. Given the clickbait kind of covers that we've gotten from Brian Michael Bendis' Superman, I'm not necessarily sure if that's what's going to be happening inside this issue. And I haven't really been following along enough to know exactly what's going to be happening. And Superman number 10 comes out, but like I mentioned before, it's all about the clickbait covers when it comes to Brian Michael Bendis' Superman run. Last issue, we showed Jonathan Kent and Jor-El going up against the entirety of the crime syndicate, and what happened? They got Ultraman talking to him inside of a volcano, no appearance from Jor-El, and then we ended on a cliffhanger with Superwoman. So if you want to check out what went on in that issue, there's going to be a link up in the corner, but overall, Superman hasn't really been my favorite book from DC, and I think I've made that pretty well known. Back at Marvel, The Wonderful World of Conan continues with Age of Conan Bellet number 2. So while I did pick up issue number 1, I didn't necessarily absorb it in the kind of way that I would have really liked. I really got to go back and read it because Conan, while an interesting character, wasn't really on my radar as far as reading the comic books. I mean, I picked up original Conan, I picked up the first issue of Savage Sword of Conan, there's a few other ones that I've kind of dabbled in, but it's just, I'm not really familiar with the Pirate Queen of the Black Coast. So I'm going to have to go back and reread Age of Conan Bellet, but I'm really into the exposure that these new properties are really going to be getting under the Marvel banner, though they were under Dark Horse for quite some time. Speaking of smaller titles, we get Chip Zdarsky's Invaders number 4, which continues the storyline of Namor the Submariner, the original Human Torch, Captain America, and the Winter Soldier. So this one is actually going to tie into Namor's early connection with Charles Xavier, which is hopefully going to explain a little bit more about this continuity and why Namor has completely gone off the deep end, even though he lives in the deep end, but why he's completely gone off the rails when it comes to being the king of Atlantis and how he's going to be invading the land. I'm not necessarily sure what's going on as far as the Xavier connection, but Chip Zdarsky's been writing some fantastic books, specifically Daredevil, and this one should be no exception. Back at DC, we get Hawkman, and as we close out Brian Hitch's run on Hawkman, I think with issue number 12, it's going to be a really fun book to really look at, because Brian Hitch is a classic artist, a superstar amongst superstars when it comes to DC, and I'm going to have to go back and read Robert Venditti's run with Brian Hitch on art because, well, he's fantastic. I know some of you readers out there are really high on Hawkman because it's had the opportunity to correct a lot of continuity issues with Hawkman's origin story, and that's really welcome for a character that's been kind of a hot mess in comic books for quite some time. But let's bounce over to somebody that's always a hot mess, and that is the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, which gets issue number 5. And in this one, we actually figure out what's going on with Aunt May, and it seems like Peter Parker is going to be too busy to help his Aunt May with her cancer. I mean, Tom Taylor, what are you doing writing that kind of storyline? I mean, this is a man that traded his happiness in order to save that old woman, so why would he never give the time necessary to help her out with her cancer? I just don't know where that's going, but that makes me want to read Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man number 5 just so I can get a few more answers. Then back over at DC, we're going to get Catwoman number 10, which is continuing the storyline of Selina Kyle after she separated from Bruce Wayne at the wedding, and she's moved to a completely different city. We've had her get her own villain in this kind of misshapen senator's wife, and then ultimately the Penguin came to town, and there's a lot of other things that are going on, but Joelle Jones has continued to write it without necessarily doing the art, and the art was one of the best things about the early issues. I'm going to have to kind of reassess my value as far as this title is concerned, just because the art was one of the stellar pieces of it, and I want to continue along with that same style, but it might not necessarily be there for me, so it's on my kind of mixed bag radar. However, one book that is not a mixed bag is Avengers No Road Home number 9, despite the fact that they have 3 different artists in Paco Medina, Chris Isaacs, and then Carlo Barberi. It's just one of those stories that continues week after week because, well, it continues week after week and it just keeps pushing the limit and pounding forward with a relentless kind of beat. I'm really excited to see where this one concludes, and overall it's been one of the better books in recent times as far as Marvel's concerned, just because of the pacing, the storytelling, and then the individual focus on the characters as we've gone through each individual issue. I'm a big fan of Avengers No Road Home, and I hope that it kind of inspires different styles of storytelling from Marvel's real quadri of writers. But if we're talking about different styles of storytelling, we have to go back to Tom King, who's recruited Amanda Conner for Batman number 68, which is going to tell the odd friendship between Selina Kyle and Lois Lane and how they went out on their bachelorette party. And this brought them into the Fortress of Solitude, evidently, which is going to be pretty interesting. I'm excited to see where this one really goes, and overall, from the vibe that I've been getting, there's a whole lot of drunken shenanigans between Selina Kyle and Lois Lane. So unlike a lot of other nightmares, it seems like they're going to be having a pretty good time, but if it's a nightmare, how tragic is this going to end? I want to know. Of course, if we're talking tragedy, we need to talk about the machine made for tragedy, and that is The Batman Who Laughs, which gets issue number 4 out of this 5-6-part miniseries. And while we saw the introduction of the Grim Knight inside the first issue, and then ultimately we got a one-shot that was dealing with a little bit more of his history, it's all about the Batman Who Laughs and how he's really going to bring this kind of chaos to Gotham. What kind of developments do we have for Batman Who Laughs as well as the Grim Knight? What is Jim Gordon going to do? How is Jim Gordon Jr. going to factor? And can Bruce really expunge all this poison, this toxin from the Joker from himself so that way he can maintain his, well, sanity? Let's find out inside Batman Who Laughs. But then the other thing I want to find out is how many people have actually died at the hands of these Kraven killbots inside Amazing Spider-Man, and hopefully number 19 is going to shed a little bit more light on that. We did see inside 18.HU a really tragic story of the Gibbon as he's kind of hunted down by these Kraven killbots, and he recounts his entire life, which was just one series of mistakes after another. And I'm just kind of curious what Nick Spencer is going to do to wrap this entire thing up, because, well, Spider-Man's played second fiddle almost the entire story, so it's time to get down and dirty for Peter Parker and see where he stands. Then, as we finish up ongoing titles, we're going to have to talk Detective Comics number 1001, which continues the story that was led off inside Detective Comics number 1000, dealing with the Arkham Knight. So Batman's going to be facing some sort of self-righteous villain, pretty similar to the one that we saw inside the Arkham Knight video game. However, the origins have to be some sort of difference, because, well, we can talk about that in a completely different video, but the Arkham Knight has a very specific origin story, and I'm wondering if this is parallels but with a different character. So I'm excited to see where this development goes, and hopefully creating this foil for Batman that is a little bit more self-righteous but still ultimately just as violent, and looking at Batman in a very different manner. Peter J. Tomasi's got a pretty good grasp on that, so I want to see where he takes it. Then in new number ones, we get Cult of Carnage, which was written by Frank Thierry, and this is continuing the storyline that's going to bring us to absolute carnage sometime in August. And while we've seen Cletus Cassidy not necessarily resurrected yet, however, he's been reborn, and then there's a few other things that are really gone on inside this Cult of Carnage web of Venom kind of storyline that Donny Cates has really been putting forward, and I'm curious to see how all these other different members of the Cult of Carnage can really be portrayed, because you can see some familiar faces from Maximum Carnage, which always excites my heart. Another new number one is going to be War of the Realms Journey into Mystery number one, which revives a classic title to tell the tale of Miles Morales' Spider-Man and a whole host of other characters that get caught up in the War of the Realms. And this one's written by the guys that actually run the Adventure Zone, so that's kind of an intriguing concept, and I really want to see what they have to tell for a story. I'm not necessarily sure this is the required reading that you're expecting out of other War of the Realms tie-ins, but I'm probably going to do a video on what you really need to read, what you should be reading, and what you really can skip completely in its entirety, so watch out for that in the future. To finish things off, we're going to be talking about Symbiote Spider-Man number one, written by Peter David with art by, well, Iban Coelho and cover art by Greg Land. So while we were originally thinking that Greg Land might be doing the entire thing, that's not the case, which is a welcome kind of treat. But Iban Coelho, he is doing some fantastic work when it comes to Venom-type storylines, so I'm excited to see what he does with the Symbiote Spider-Man, and Peter David has a really classic grasp on the Spider-Man character, and this is set back when Peter first got the symbiote, pre-Venom, and it's going to be a Mysterio story that is going to, well, kind of tie into the movie. So let's see what kind of tangled webs they weave when it comes to Symbiote Spider-Man back in a little bit of history. But I want to know what you guys are excited for this Wednesday, so hit me up in the comments down below and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books and more.